Yo guys, Punkrat another video. The Suppression Room, better known as the Depression Room. A place so enveloped in World of Warcraft's history, specifically in the Legacy days, that even if you didn't play back then, you probably heard about it somewhere. A place that stopped pugs from being able to go further into the raid, gaining access to those 3 loot pinatas in the Black Drakes. A place that on surface level seems relatively simple, but in execution, especially with 40 people in the context of vanilla raiding, ends up getting some of the best of us. Nowadays, we're so good at World of Warcraft that, most guilds are probably going to be able to get through this. It's not going to be like back in the day where it would absolutely crush guilds, but it's going to be probably the hardest thing that you'll encounter progressing with your guild since the release of Classic WoW. And I think that's a pretty easy prediction to make. The Depression Room and Chromagus are probably the 2 hardest parts of BWL. So this video I planned as a service to you and your guild. Here we're going to be going over everything you need to know in order to conquer the Depression Room. Let's get into it. Alright, so firstly, what is the Suppression Room? It's actually the first raid gauntlet in World of Warcraft's history. It's a massive 2-staged level that you need to get through without dying, which at the end transitions into a boss fight being Broodlord Lair. You're dealing with the environment, all the little cubbies that you have to go through, the suppression pylons which need to be taken care of ahead of time in order to pass your raid through, ever respawning whelps, and elite creatures that are padding and roaming around as well. Everything which has to be executed perfectly, or you wipe and have to restart and clear your way through again and again until you get it right. Without clearing through the Suppression Room, you do not get access to the second portion of BWL, where you're going to encounter super difficult bosses and of course difficult trash as well. Now I just mentioned that you're having to deal with a bunch of different creatures. What exactly are those creatures? Well, let's go over them. So firstly, the most basic one are the whelps. You have a ton of chromatic whelps scattered throughout every single pylon, so each suppression pylon has a grouping of whelps around it. There's really nothing too difficult about dealing with them except for the fact that they constantly respawn, I believe in about 30 seconds. This means that you have to actually make your way to either a safe spot within the suppression room to recover or constantly be moving through in order to not be dealing with the whelps that are respawning behind you. They don't have any special abilities, they're just kind of annoying and always there. Next on the list, we have the hatchers. So on both levels of the suppression room, you're going to have rows of hatchers that are going to be padding back and forth across the room. These hatchers must be dealt with before you start moving your raid through. The only mechanic that you have to deal with them is a flame strike ability. So they're going to cast a flame strike, and if your raid is stacked up or clumped up, it's going to hit everybody, and most likely your healers are not going to be able to keep up. Now on private servers, you were not able to interrupt the flame strike, and to be honest, if you were able to interrupt it, it would make the mechanic pretty much trivial. In Classic, of course, we have no idea how it's going to be, but I'd presume that it's also not going to be interruptible, meaning you want your tank to be tanking them outside of the main ranged raid group. And the last enemy NPCs that we're dealing with are groups of Taskmasters. So as you make your way through, there's also going to be roaming groups of orcs, orc healers essentially. Now what the Taskmasters do is cast a prayer of healing spell, basically an AoE heal that'll heal all friendly targets, or at least friendly to them, within a certain radius. And they're pretty much endlessly casting these heals over and over again. Although what you're able to do to counter that is CC them, stun them, whatever you have in your toolbook you're able to use against them. And if you pull a group of Taskmasters accidentally while you also have a hatcher, it can create a pretty bad scenario where you'll have the Taskmasters that'll constantly be healing each other plus the hatcher as well, and it's kind of hard to deal with. Now the last thing that we should probably cover, it's not an NPC, but before we get into the nitty gritty, are of course the core and the reason why it's called the suppression room, the suppression pylons, or the suppression devices. So there's these sort of like piston objects that are scattered evenly throughout the entire 2 levels of the suppression room in a grid pattern. These are traps that must be disabled, and the only person in the raid who can do that is obviously a rogue using their thieves tools. But of course a rogue can't just run up and disable them since there's whelps everywhere and NPCs padding back and forth. Now what the suppression aura does is reduce your movement speed by 80%, your casting speed by 80%, and your time between your attacks by 400%. So if a suppression device is up, your raid is pretty much neutralized, and the suppression pylons, once disabled, only stay down for about 30 seconds. So those are all the factors that you're dealing with. Now I haven't gone into too much detail when it comes to tackling each one of those challenges because they're all intertwined, so that's exactly what we're going to do now. We're going to cover all of the nitty-gritty information, and I'm going to give you guys some tips and a general outlook on what you want to be doing in order to progress through this part of the raid. So let's do that. So the first thing that you need is to get those pylons down. But in order to do that, you have to clear the way forward. So this is where the hunter comes in with its 41-yard range, an ability to just instantly let off an arcane shot or something and pull something back. You want to stay at this ledge to begin with and pull as much as you can backwards to clear the way through, so you can then start creating a path for your raid to move to the first neutral spot. So what's going to happen here is a hunter is going to pull the first 2 hatchers, one by one of course. So he's going to pull the first one, tank's going to tank it away from the raid on the edge of the platform. You're going to take it down, then the hunter's going to pull the second hatcher, you're going to do the exact same thing, and you've now cleared the elites for about half of the first portion of the suppression room. Now the next thing that you want to do is pull the Taskmasters, but you want to make sure, at least on your first time when you're not super comfortable, to not pull the hatchers either at the same time, both at the same time, or with the Taskmasters involved. And this is something that's really crucial for your hunter to understand. The hatchers are padding back and forth, and sometimes they can be right next to each other just crossing over. You want to wait till they're quite separate because they have a big aggro radius or aggro trigger radius after being pulled. So once the hatcher is isolated, you'll pull it back. And for the Taskmasters, they actually have a really big pat range, so just make sure they're far off, they're not pulling with it, and when it's time to grab them, make sure they're all marked and assign a rogue onto each target. That way, when they're casting their Prayer of Healing, the rogues will be able to kick. And of course, mages, don't forget that you have an ability called Counterspell. Now once you've cleared your way a little bit through, it's time to drop a couple pylons. So here, once again, the hunter is going to pull as many whelps as he can away from the first initial pylons on the left side of the room, which leads to the ramp. You want to be clearing a straight line through the suppression room. So a hunter is going to be pulling back the whelps, and then a rogue who's going to remain stealth is going to start moving forward at those cleared pylons and start dropping them down. Once you've got about half of the pylons cleared, it's time for the hunter to move up again. Since he won't be affected by the suppression aura, it's now the hunter's job to start pulling the same elites that he was doing earlier, just for the second portion of the room, bringing the hatchers back and clearing the next Taskmasters. You're going to be pulling them all the way back once again. Although keep in mind, if you're feeling a little bit cocky, you can actually move your raid halfway through, get into one of the little cubbies here on the side, and start clearing the hatchers at the midway point and then start moving forward. But the idea is to clear the way forward, pull it back, make sure the pylons are empty so your rogues can start going ahead to get the pylons down, clearing a path for you in your raid. Now I kept mentioning safe spots, and this is because there's a ton of them within the suppression room. And these are the core to successfully making your way through. So if we look at the map over here, you're going to see there's all kinds of little cubbies. And there's also a ramp side here, a ramp tunnel that leads up to the second floor. A lot of these spots are safe spots, or at least relative safe spots, and some of them pure safe spots. So it's imperative to keep your raid stacked as a cohesive unit when moving through the suppression room. And essentially what you want to be doing is going from little cubby to little cubby, hugging all the way into the wall so that you can drop combat, have your healers and casters regen mana, and then start pushing forward again once everyone's ready. The most important safe spot to know is the middle one, the tunnel ramp. This is the first checkpoint. Once you've cleared through the first room, this is where you can recover for a good portion of time. And you can also start pulling mobs back here, like hatchers and the next Taskmasters. But when moving through to that spot, you're obviously going to have to deal with the whelps. And this is something that we never mentioned earlier. Now when it comes to the whelps, you actually don't want to DPS them as you're going through because they're constantly respawning. So what you want to do is gather a good portion of them, a ton of them to be completely honest, make your way through with your raid. Once you've reached a checkpoint, then you're going to have mages and warlocks start casting AoE. Warlocks are going to hellfire, mages are going to go all out, and healers make sure to spam pre-heals on the casters doing their AoE damage to the whelps. Now warriors, a lot of you guys are thinking we don't have AoE tanking abilities, so how do we do this? Well, it's all about gadgets. The first one is the Force Reactive Disc, and this is something that your guild should have been working towards for a long time now. This shield is absolutely bonkers, I've covered in so many of my videos, but you want your main tank, or at least a couple tanks, to have at least 2 of these in their inventory, and that's because when it takes hits to its durability, so you want to have a second one just in case your first one breaks. And also it's a weapon, so you can put it on and off. You can equip it to gather everything up and then take it off if you want to preserve the durability. You could have things like Crystal Charge, Sapper Charges, and Retribution Aura, and those kinds of Thorn debuffs to reflect damage and keep everything onto you. Just do everything in your power to keep all of the whelps on the tank, group them up, and then AoE them down once you've made your way to a checkpoint. Now once you get to the tunnel stairs, this is basically the same spot as the first edge spot that we were pulling the hatchers and all the stuff back to at the first part. You're going to pull everything back and then rinse and repeat and start making your way through the suppression area. this time hugging the right wall and going on that side of the room. And the reason you want to go on that side is because some of the best safe spots are in those little cubby corners. Keep in mind here, hunters, you have to be extremely careful with how you're pulling the hatchers back. Make sure that they're isolated, I cannot stress this enough. And tanks, make sure that you're not bringing the hatchers who are going to cast flame strikes into those cubbies. You want to tank them outside of the cubby, so those flame strikes are hitting only the melee and tanks instead of hitting your entire ranged and healer group plus the melee and tanks. Now going forward, same thing, hunters are pulling back, clearing the path forward, rogues are dropping pylons, tanks are gathering whelps as it's time to move forward, going into the next cubby, hugging the corner, AoEing the whelps, drinking, resetting, and moving forward. At this point, you're at the end of the suppression room, and this is a very delicate portion of the gauntlet because now it's time to engage the boss. This has to be done properly. So you're going to start off with your raid at the last corner cubby right over here. This is the last safe spot, and then you're going to have 3 pylons positioned in a triangle. 1, 2, 3. Every single one of those pylons needs to be dropped without aggroing the boss so that your entire raid can move through, position the boss without dealing with the suppression aura. The way that you want to do this is potentially have a rogue in the raid who has improved stealth, but to be honest, that's probably not going to be the case. So instead, what I personally have always opted to do is have a rogue precast vanish in stealth to improve his stealth ability, move forward and quickly drop those 3 traps, and then right after, get your raid through. Position the boss, and it's go time to engage Broodlord. So that's pretty much it. That's the suppression room. I really hope that I covered absolutely everything. It's really just a delicate balance of hunters pulling ahead, tanks picking up the whelps with the knickknacks that they have access to, mages AoEing, healers focus healing the right targets, off tanks getting the hatchers and tanking them out of the raid, going from cubby to cubby to cubby using all the safe spots, hunters again pulling whelps from ahead and clearing the pylons so that rogues can drop all of the suppression devices ahead, making your way through, and really the most important thing is being a cohesive unit that always moves together. The last thing that you want is for people to lag behind and get stuck in a pylon or a suppression device that comes back up and slows people in the back. And of course, at the end, really utilizing those cubbies, having a rogue that can drop the last 3 pylons after the hunters cleared the mobs back, and then engage the boss in a very clean manner. That's pretty much it. If you can master all of these elements and coordinate them all at the same time, then you're going to have a cakewalk in the suppression room, and it will no longer be the depression room. So if you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, of course, leave a like, comment, subscribe, you know the drill, soldiers. Hit the notification bell to be notified every single time I post a new video straight out of the render oven. And with that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.